Hi, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
I'm Professor Art Arbach. The way I just want to introduce myself. We have a whole house of people that are here with us today. Kami Akavan, I'm sure you probably know or are familiar with, as well as our entire team. So I know how busy you are. We want to be mindful of your time. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a couple of introductory comments, but then I'll turn it over to the team and let them do their presentation. After the presentation is when we have time for question and answer. And that is open to really anyone, but of course we always defer to sort of senior status. So if it works out with you, Senator, we'll probably defer to you to start off with. But just know that it's been a real pleasure this semester working with everyone in your office, from Sam to Lily to Tina. They've all just been wonderful. You're very fortunate to have such a wonderful staff.
man.
And on such an important issue of wildfire policy. And I think the students have gotten a great deal out of everything. So I will stop there and turn it over to the team, and we will move forward. So enjoy, and we'll see you in a bit with the Q&A.
Go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see that? Perfect. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Priya, and with me I have Amara, Ryan, and Brandon. First of all, I just want to thank everybody from Senator Ben Allen's office for coming and helping throughout the semester. It definitely means a lot to us. We're going to be presenting our research on California wildfire management and our policy recommendations. Our guiding question was, how can California's wildfire management policies adapt and improve? And to answer this, I will begin by talking about international best practices. I'll pass it off to Amara, who will discuss state best practices. Ryan will discuss prescribed burning, and Brandon will finish off by discussing insurance policies and the FAIR plan, as well as presenting our final policy proposals. I will begin by discussing 3 countries, Australia, Canada, and Portugal, and their wildfire practices and what California can take away from their actions. I picked these 3 countries because of their similarities to California, such as climate, demographics, history, and more. I also believe that these countries' practices are most relevant and applicable to California. To begin with Australia, Australia and California have numerous similarities and a history of collaboration with wildfire mitigation. But even with these similarities, California can learn from many of the differences and complexities in Australia's management practices. One of those differences is in Australia's system of self-reliance, a major part of that being Australia's stay and defend policies, where the country provides tools to homeowners to protect themselves and their property instead of automatic evacuation like in California. With this policy, officials train residents extensively to fireproof their homes and educate them about what to expect and what to do if they choose to stay as flames advance. This strong educational protocol gives Australians a wealth of information and knowledge about fire safety and preparation they can employ in emergencies that many Californians simply do not have. An example of this is that Australia has one of the largest volunteer firefighting forces, like the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, which has over 70,000 volunteer members. So this is proof that their citizens are engaged and active in fire resilience, arguably more than California citizens. Fire agencies, such as the one in Victoria, Australia, have utilized a concept of shared responsibility between emergency agencies and the general public through a community-based collaborative decision-making process. From a psychological perspective, researchers found that this idea of shared responsibility is successful, and the sense of community and creative problem solving that comes with it is a means to develop cognitive abilities to enhance resilience to wildfires. And lastly, research and experts have said that Australia's success in addressing wildfires is in its ability to respond after disaster, learn from it, and quickly amend even long-lasting policies. For other countries experiencing natural disasters like these, researchers have championed this quick action and urged other countries to adopt similar swift movements. To next move on to Canada, researchers have pointed to 3 items: residential trust in government agencies, residential experience with wildfire mitigation activities, and the use of local capacity to implement wildfire mitigation policies as reasons for success in Canada. Overall, in Canada, the government has found success in creating policies centered around these topics to utilize the experience of communities and create a dialogue between government and the people. Additionally, researchers have found that the key differences between Canada and the United States is in the perception and the action of communities in wildfire risk zones and the importance of catering to local communities. There is great value in tailoring protocols to a specific community's needs and populations instead of a one-size-fits-all approach. An example of this was found in one source, which reflected on First Nations, which is a group of Canadian Indigenous peoples' evacuation experiences. In this piece, they spoke about how First Nations needed to shelter in place with air filtration systems because there's higher rates of asthma and other health-related conditions in First Nation community that compared to the greater community and greater population. This is an example of catering to community needs and populations, which Canada has found success in and is working to implement even more, especially in under-resourced and less affluent areas. Canadian researchers have found success in educational programs conveying specific risks while also connecting community members with a shared risk with each other and with people knowledgeable about fire. Shared risk is the idea that the control of a particular risk or the consequences of a particular risk actually fall upon multiple functional areas in one organization. Essentially, Canada has found success in connecting agencies and people through a shared responsibility to protect their own community rather than that being the responsibility of separate agencies. Canada is also looking to improve its preparedness capacity, as well as increasing their preparedness phase of wildfire mitigation, as that has the highest return on investment. This includes enhancing and mobilizing response readiness through educational initiatives, such as Canada's Fire Start program. And then to move on to Portugal. Portugal has had a history of significantly deadly wildfires, especially for their lower income communities. California can learn a lot from Portugal's most deadly wildfire, which happened in June of 2017. After this wildfire, Tiago Oliveira, who is the director of the Portuguese National Fire Control Agency, believed that the abandonment of rural land due to a lack of economic opportunity, in addition to widespread government unwillingness to live with fire, is the reason why Mediterranean ecosystems, which includes California, are suffering. Oliveira proposed numerous solutions, including the idea of a polycentric governance model where local communities are given the authority and resources to solve problems. Communities in Portugal have urged their authorities to step down from a top-down approach of a centralized state authority and volunteer firefighters being relied on solely. Communities have been urging collaboration with environmental groups, community organizations, community leaders, and more in solving problems. Without doing so, communities have cited feeling disconnected from decision-making, only spurring their frustration with their government leaders. While we can learn about what is being done right, we can also learn about what other countries are looking to improve. And within the context of Portugal, researchers have pointed out that they can improve in their communication, promoting a universal terminology, and promoting a better connection between citizens and policies. Communication on wildfire risk in Portugal is lacking, and communities do not have a cohesive set of terms and concepts to understand and use to protect themselves and their families. In order to be more equitable as well, wildfire mitigation and wildfire education must be conscious of the diversity and differing needs and attempt to cater towards these unique communities. So with all of these three countries, there's the question of what is relevant to California. Number one, community-based solutions hold a lot of power. This can be seen through Australia's education initiatives with their Stay and Defend protocol, in addition to Canada's protocols. By creating solutions at the community level and building connections around and between communities through a common narrative of risk, California can increase their community's social cohesion, thus boosting their resilience to wildfires. By spreading responsibility across community organizations, agencies, offices, and more, fighting wildfires will be more of a community action, which will only benefit California in the future. Number two, one-size-fits-all approaches are not effective, especially with California's diversity. California is an incredibly diverse state, and creating generalized protocols, whether that's evacuation protocols or housing policies, without connecting with the unique needs of the community is ineffective and will lead to problems. Knowing the community's needs, asking about them, catering to things like health issues, access to roads, language, access to internet, and more will only help communities drastically. These three countries have either inactive community level initiatives or are pushing for them and have found great success. And then number three, involve community members in decision-making and in boosting community education. Involving community members in decision-making can help connect citizens to policies and can create more trust between the public and policymakers, two elements that Canada has found successful. Using a polycentric governance model like Oliveira suggested in the case of Portugal, integrates all of the above takeaways and creates more productive conversations and an equal playing field, and one where community members can feel that their voices are being heard to create change. Involving community members can also help boost education and create a common dialogue and universal terminology, which will only benefit Californians. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Amara, who will discuss state best practices.
Thank you for that handoff, Priya. And as she stated, I will be discussing state best practices. But with this in mind, what's been guiding all of this is reducing wildfire risk before the season starts and making homes and communities more resilient to wildfires in the future. Next slide, please. And it's trash day, so my apologies if you hear that in the background. So the name of the game for all of this is going to be prevention, being as proactive as we can, and not relying solely on reactive methods. So with this component of the group research, it was my job to find bills and legislation from other state governments in relation to natural disasters and figure out what best practices and policies can be implemented here or potentially built upon. So I've chosen 5 states across the country who deal with natural disaster annually and therefore have much practice with creating solutions for these problems and also utilizing preventative methods in the future. So I've chosen 5 states, and 3 of the 5 states deal with natural disasters on a regular basis each year. And those include Texas, New York, and North Carolina. And then Texas, Florida, and New York. And then for wildfires, Oregon and North Carolina deal with these each year as well on an increasing basis as well as California does as well. And I will discuss what policies can be built upon. So first, for Texas, since they face numerous natural disasters every year, including hurricanes and flooding, they've created a bill called Senate Bill 7, which is essentially a rainy day fund. And with this, they are able to pull more than $3 billion from the state's rainy day fund to help pay for flood control projects statewide. And I think this could be useful for California because with wildfires increasing every year and California having one of the largest economies in the state, we really need to set aside the money to protect ourselves from wildfires and also provide grants and loans for wildfire control projects and mitigation throughout the state. Next, we have Florida, which mandates government NGO collaboration when it comes to government-funded projects. So this program in Florida is where agencies from local planning councils to the also, as well as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who make their own sea level projections. They're mandated under this bill to collaborate their official projections with the state in order for government-funded projects to be brought about. So because certain agencies create their own projections, the state is wanting to create uniformity in all areas of this so that when government-funded projects do come about, not everyone's basing their information on the same projections instead of different variables in different organizations from one place to another. So I think California could really benefit from this because there are multiple organizations throughout the state that are doing wildfire research, but some people are predicting certain things while other organizations are predicting another thing. So if there's uniformity throughout the state and finding solutions, then more can be done. Next, we have Oregon, which has created the Governor's Council on Wildfire Response as an executive order. So with this Council on Wildfire Response, the current model is for them to assess wildfire prevention, preparedness, and response, and also analyze whether or not the current model is sustainable given the increased wildfire risk each year. The task force is set to handle funding for wildfire responses to fires on underprotected areas, and help with wildfire mitigation and smoke, which affects the health of local communities. So although California does have a task force that is dedicated to these areas, the thing about Oregon is that they're focused on 3 separate issues with 3 separate subcommittees that really put a lot of intense work into this. And those include mitigation, suppression, and recovery efforts. So if California is able to build upon the model that Oregon has set from us, I think that we would be much better for the future and communities will be more well off. Next, we have New York, which has Bill S4778B, which is our emergency procedure bill. And this was sponsored by Senator Golden, and it established a statewide executive plan for natural disaster emergency and procedure, which allowed state and local officials to act cooperatively and efficiently in the event if a natural disaster does occur. So in California, when wildfires do occur, the public is rarely aware of a clear and concise, effective set of guidelines for what to do if wildfire happens, how they can prepare, and what actions to take afterward. Personally, I've been affected by wildfire in my neighborhood. I had to evacuate my home, but no information was given to me. I got a knock on the door from the police. They told us that we had to pack our stuff and leave for our safety, but we didn't know what to do to prepare beforehand and what to do after. We just had to, find a hotel and stay there for who knows how long. And I think California citizens would deeply benefit from an effective set of guidelines in the way that New York presents. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have North Carolina, which deals with the area of defensible space. So each year, homes are built on the edge of forests and grasslands that are especially vulnerable to wildfires, and development in these zones continues to increase, especially in California, when our population is expanding more and more every year, and we're building homes out into these areas. So in order to prevent wildfire risk, we need to implement the idea of defensible space, but since California has introduced this a few years ago, we're only mandated up to 100 feet. Here in North Carolina, they mandate this defensible space up to 200 feet. And while 200 feet isn't necessary for every home or property in California, the homes that would benefit from the 200 feet do not do it because California only mandates that 100 feet. So if we're able to expand outside of the zone 1 and zone 2, which are pictured in the diagram below, and expand to zone 3, which increases to 200 feet, and we remove these combustible materials and replace them with more native vegetation or concrete and gravel, then this would really protect homes and citizens from wildfire risk. Next slide, please. And lastly, wrapping this all together, what are these state best practices that California can benefit from? And like I said before, the name of the game is prevention, preparation, and lessening the impact of wildfires every year. And if we are able to follow these 5 best practices from these states or build upon them, I'm sure California could greatly benefit from them. So number 1, as I mentioned before with North Carolina, extending this defensible space up to 200 feet. Second would be a concise wildfire protocol and procedure in the way that New York has an effective set of guidelines when natural disaster occurs in the state. Number 3 would be post-care wildfire rainy day funds in the way that Texas sets aside money every year to, especially for hurricanes and natural disaster. And California needs to do the same as well, since wildfire is not an issue that is going to suddenly disappear. It's only going to get worse as climate change increases, and we need to be prepared for that and set money aside. Number 4 is government organization collaboration in the same way that Florida mandates that all organizations and governments have maintain uniformity in finding solutions for government funded projects. And number 5, formulated government sponsored wildfire committees, which could be built upon from Oregon. And the last thing on this slide is not coming from a state practice or legislation, but it's an idea I had in mind, which would be DARE, but for wildfire education in school. So for me and my cohort, we've all had to endure DARE in elementary school, the drug abuse resistance training. And sometimes it wasn't the funnest thing to do. And there are critics who say it wasn't effective, but we all remember that and took stuff away from it. So I think if we were able to emphasize wildfire education in schools in the same way that they emphasize drug resistance training, this would be very beneficial for students. It would just be one day out of the year, but they would really take a lot of tools and information away from this on how to be prepared when wildfires happen and what to do afterward. And with that, I will pass it off to Ryan, who will discuss wildfire strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Amara, for your presentation on best state practices. I'm Ryan Coe, and I will be discussing wildfire prevention strategy, specifically prescribed burning science and its policy implications. Next slide, please. First, let's talk about the science of prescribed burnings. Prescribed burnings minimize fire size and severity, which makes fires more manageable, cause less damage, and is ultimately better for the environment and the economy. But how does it work? The more time it's been since the last fire in a given area, the more fuel buildup occurs. This looks like taller, larger trees, denser forests, and denser shrubbery. The more fuel there is for a fire, the greater risk of a high intensity fire. Prescribed burning short circuits this process by reducing the time since last fire. If we are able to research areas that haven't had fires in decades, prescribed burnings are a useful tool to reduce fuel buildup in those areas and thus significantly reduce the risk of a high intensity fire. High intensity fires are unmanageable. If you look at the first set of images, low intensity fires are easily controlled and managed by firefighting forces. A moderate intensity fire might be reaching the upper limits of capacity of firefighters on the ground and might have to require dozers, pumpers, or even aircraft. A high intensity fire could be uncontainable, and firefighters would have to let the fire burn out and spread itself thin before putting out the threat. In the worst scenarios, that waiting is at the cost of wildlife burned to the ground, property damage, and potentially lives lost. High intensity fires have also caused the most damage in California historically. I'd like to bring your attention to the graph on the far right. The x-axis categorizes fires based on their size, 25 hectares or less, 50 hectares, 75, etc., all the way up to 150 hectares plus. The y-axis measures the number of patches or fires that occurred for a given size and the total area of damage each size causes. To summarize the findings, this data tells us that the few large fires further to the right cause way more damage than all of the small fires combined, more than twofold. To summarize, 87% of burned patches were 25 hectares on the left-hand side, but they only account for 17% of the total burned area, while the largest patches on the furthest right accounted for only 3% of the total number of patches, but 64% of the total burned area. Thus, our wildfire prevention policies should be geared towards preventing large fires through strategies like prescribed burning instead of focusing on the small ones. Next slide, please. Next, I'll be covering current policies and barriers to prescribed burnings. Current funding for fuel reduction projects is scarce, which has caused major backlogs in planned projects. According to experts, about 20 million acres in California could use fuel treatment. However, current funding schemes are not matching the science. Of CAL FIRE's $2.5 billion annual budget in 2020, just over 10% of it went to preventative measures like thinning and burning. And of more than 9,000 employees, less than 200 of them specialize in fuel reduction. This lack of resources has caused a huge backlog. Len Nielsen, CAL FIRE's staff chief for prescribed burning and environmental protection, said CAL FIRE has more than 500 planned burns and other fuel reduction projects that are ready to go and primed, but are waiting for funding, resources, crew, and equipment. In addition, many private landowners want to initiate their own prescribed burnings, but CAL FIRE's vegetation management program, which assists private landowners, is a dead end for most, simply because of lack of resources and manpower invested in the program. Some landowners have been on the list for 6 years and have never gotten a call back. The fuel reduction projects initiated in recent years have had strong success. Under an executive order in 2019, the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection implemented 35 emergency thinning and burning projects, including a fuel break around Shaver Lake in Fresno County, which eventually helped contain Creek Fire, one of the largest fires in 2020. Nielsen himself said that without that work, the Creek Fire would have been so much worse. This success should be the momentum for long-term fuel treatment initiatives, but as stated before, current support isn't matching up right now. The next slide, please. Now that we know general policy around fuel reductions, which conditions are prescribed burnings best suited? So first, map 1 is a map of national forest types used in a study that correlated fuel load and fire intensity to forest type and region. I made my own key to help visualize the results. Yellow, green, and black are parts of the map which represent mixed Gopher, mixed evergreen, and big cone Douglas forest types that are where prescribed burnings would be the most effective, while red and orange are not as statistically conclusive. This demonstrates that it's not just a NorCal, SoCal thing, as can be seen by significant amounts of green and yellow in Southern California. Specifically, the study found that prescribed burnings would be effective on mixed evergreen forests in the South Coast. This implicates broader wildfire prevention strategy, including bills like SB 55 that deal with vulnerable communities. This next map, map 2, is a map of the most vulnerable communities, or is a most vulnerable communities map, with the redder dots representing very high hazard severity zones. Most of the vulnerable communities that be affected by policies like SB 55 are vulnerable because of fuel buildup in those regions that have not been dealt with, but could be with fuel reductions. Next slide, please. What is the application to California? First, prescribed burnings are critical to wildfire prevention strategy. As climate change lengthens the wildfire season and creates hotter, drier summers, prescribed burning is becoming more urgent as the risk of an intense fire happening increases. Second, there is a severe lack of funding for projects. Just over 10% of CAL FIRE's budget goes to fuel reduction, which is preventing effective implementation. To put this into context, even as scientists on the subject promote fuel reduction treatment on 1 million acres per year, California burns only 125,000. And compared to other states, California is drastically behind on these issues. Specifically, the southeastern state of Florida burns approximately 2 million acres per year. 3, lack of knowledge and urgency is hindering political support. There are some concerns about regional application of prescribed burnings, most notably the Chaparral and the Chaparral Institute, a strong advocate against prescribed burnings in the Chaparral region. In my research, there are several points to be made regarding the opposition. First, the science is mixed. Most of the Chaparral studies, or most of the research of the Chaparral, is sparse and older, with more recent studies citing a need for more experimentation to come to stronger conclusions about the efficacy of prescribed burnings in these regions. Second, and most importantly, and the reason as to why it's at the end of the presentation, is that it doesn't necessarily matter as much to the broader debate. Chaparral comprises 9% of California's wildlife vegetation as compared to forests, making up more than 30% of the state. And the most vulnerable communities in the north and the south are surrounded by or nearby forests that could benefit from prescribed burnings. Ultimately, the science is clear about the benefits of prescribed burnings in many forests, and the urgency of broader policy initiatives shouldn't be muddled by these technicalities that are not yet wholly supported by science. Now I'll be handing it off to Brandon to discuss the California FAIR Plan and insurance policies.
Yeah, really great stuff, Ryan. Great part of your presentation. So the California FAIR Plan needed improvements for the safety and convenience of residents. Next slide. So what is the FAIR Plan? A last resort plan for people who cannot obtain private insurance, private company insurance for whatever reason. And why is it important to look at the FAIR Plan? I mean, it's important for a multitude of reasons. First off, the state wants to promote affordable and safe homeowner insurance, even when there is fear of wildfires and rise of wildfires. The FAIR Plan rates are continuing to rise, with private insurance companies depending on the area of property and the value of the property. So the goal of the FAIR Plan is to provide a cushion to residents to receive affordable homeowner insurance. However, the intention and goal of every FAIR Plan is to get as many people off of the plan and pair them with private insurance companies for affordable rates as possible. I will get into this more later, but many residents are still in the California FAIR Plan, whereas states like Texas, Oregon, and Washington have succeeded in continuing to get more and more people each year off of the FAIR Plan. Slide. So problems with the California FAIR Plan as implemented now. So the California FAIR Plan has a liability dwelling limit of only $1 million. And this goes for most FAIR plans across the nation. Their dwelling limit is $1 million. However, $1 million in Texas is completely different property value than $1 million in a lot of big cities in California. And I'm by no way advocating that people with $3+ million homes should be on the FAIR Plan, but the problem arises in it should be expanded a little more just to provide some cushion for a lot of non-combustible materials to be used for rebuild process and the legal disputes between insurance companies and homeowners. Another problem is there's too many people on the plan as of right now. And yeah, I mean, we just need to get more people off of the plan and pair them with private insurance companies. And the FAIR Plan is continuing to raise its rates without getting enough people each year off of the plan. Next slide.
Is this partly because there's too much, there's not enough, well, the insurance companies have been rolling back their coverage?
Yeah, I'm gonna get into that in a bit. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of insurance companies moving, not operating as much in the state anymore, which is indicative of, the congressional units, us losing our seats, people moving to Texas, stuff like that. but there's a disconnect between the private insurance companies and understanding the value of big city homes in like Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego. So what that's doing is they continue to raise their rates, not giving proper values to people with, let's say, a $1 million home in Inglewood, and they're treating that same $1 million home in Inglewood like a $1 million home in Texas, which is not indicative of what we want to do. But I'll get into that in a bit, but that's a great question. So the safe requirements for construction in fire-prone areas. So this is some policies that and requirements that California is doing a very good job of. And it's it goes to like the Los Angeles Building Code, Chapter 6, types of construction, 7, fire and smoke protection, Chapter 14, exterior walls, and Chapter 15, roof assemblies and rooftop structures, among other codes. Now, Los Angeles Building Code is in accordance with the International Building Code and other statewide codes, which require similar, if not the exact same materials to build homes that are sustainable against natural disasters in California, specifically wildfires and of course, earthquakes. So like I mentioned earlier, non-combustible materials are being used to build these homes. So what are these non-combustible materials? Well, it's Portland cement concrete, gypsum concrete, magnesium concrete, types of gravel, pumice, silica, fire-resistant wood, and yeah, I mean, ignition resistant material, glass and brick, that's fire resistant as well. So these are really great requirements to build sustainable homes. So they're doing California's doing the absolutely correct things in requiring this. Another thing that was passed in 2018 by Governor Brown was extending permits from 6 months to 1 year. And why is this important? Well, it provides both homeowners, construction workers, and insurance companies to figure out their issues with the homeowners and really extend the process so the building can be done correctly with the requirements and takes less stress off of all parties. So those are two things doing well. Next slide. So disputes between homeowners and companies, insurance companies. So this is a big thing. This is never going to change. There's always going to be a dispute. Insurance companies are always going to want to pay the minimum possible. Specifically, if it's a really wealthy, valued home, it needs high-end material to rebuild. Like I mentioned earlier, there's some legal disputes. Insurance company will come out, this person, let's say, with a damaged or destroyed $3 million home, $2 million home, whatever. They're gonna be like, well, we think we should pay $500,000 because, or less, because that can get you all the material, all of the work that needs to be done to rebuild the house based off of the plan you have at the moment. And the homeowner can be like, I want this house to have the same bones as before and the same type of value based on of its non-combustible materials that it had before it was damaged or destroyed. And what happens is there are long disputes between the two. And this is obviously an issue, and yes, $1 million is a lot, like I said, for the policy limit, but it should be expanded upon too, because until private companies give the rates Californians deserve, there should be that cushion with the FAIR plan until it can be diminished and they all get on the same page about what insurance rates should be in California. Next slide. So right here, we have a graph of, states with the highest homeowner insurance rates, annual premiums, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, hurricane states, obviously much more destructive than wildfires. A lot of times they're going to obviously have the highest premiums. Decided not to look at Florida, Louisiana, Oklahoma, or any of those states. Texas is interesting because Texas is a state that has very high premiums, and obviously California will never get to those premiums because we don't have hurricanes, plain and simple. However, Texas, specifically in Harris County, which is the biggest county in Texas, it had 60,000 people on its FAIR plan in 2019 and decreased that by 10,000 the next year. And people are asking, how is that possible if premiums are so high? Well, they're high, but they're also relatively fair considering the magnitude of these hurricanes, these storms, and what could happen to the homes. So they have a really great relationship with private insurance companies, the FAIR plan and the government of Texas. So that's the only thing we can look at Texas is how can we improve our relationship with private companies for the FAIR plan and the state government so that we can all get on the same page about the property value. Now, Washington is very important, and it's the state that I kind of look at California of being, even though it has a completely different economy. Washington rates are relatively low. They're $100 to $200 less per average. If you look at difference in liabilities, 250K liability is, cheaper home limit. And if you go up the ranks, it's just more and more liability. It's less than California by at least $100 to $200 on average. They have a really good relationship with the FAIR plan, and homeowners are not on the FAIR plan. They're like, they almost have nobody on the FAIR plan anymore. It's more just a last resort thing, which is what it should be. And what they're able to do is increase the rates for the FAIR plan, so much so that because people are on these private company plans. Now, Colorado is something we cannot become. No FAIR plan, rise in wildfires. And how is it that Colorado, with less property and cash value with around the state, has 4 times more average premium rates in California? This is because they don't have a FAIR plan. So California is doing relatively well initiating this FAIR plan. It's actually, above national average, and it's doing an okay job. So we can't become Colorado and not have a cushion, because then private insurance companies, there's less regulations or, communication on what they can and can't charge. And also residents are having a tough time to survive there. Oregon is a little bit different. Now, Oregon has a FAIR plan, and it has some of the lowest rates in the country. Then again, Oregon is not California. There's less wildfires, less natural disasters. It is on the West Coast, and it's really got less property value all around the state. So, they have really, really low rates at 776 on average for a 250K liability. However, their FAIR plan, they have no dwelling or liability insurance on their FAIR plan, which is really weird. It's a very limited plan. So what's going to happen is, if, God forbid, fires and wildfires and stuff destroy a lot of homes in Oregon, right? What's going to happen is their rates are going to go up dramatically, and no one's going to be able to get that dwelling and liability insurance from the FAIR plan. So they need to expand it more as well. So that's the state we can look at. Next slide. So here I have a graph comparing and contrasting the states of, California, Oregon, Washington, Texas, states I just talked about. And it's like, FAIR plan, do they have it? Average annual premium for 250K dwelling. Our FAIR plan rates going up, and our private insurance company rates going up. So this is something you can look at for about like 15 seconds, 30 seconds, however long you want to see. And you can see that California's average annual premium for dwelling is 1,101, and Colorado's is close to 2,000 for that same thing. Washington's only a little bit, like 100 less on average, but it does have a better relationship with private insurance companies. Obviously, Texas, completely different natural disaster, like I said, so the premiums are very high. Next slide. So key takeaways. California does not have the worst insurance in the country. In fact, it's relatively good on comparison to other states. Both private and FAIR plan insurances are doing a good job, a decent job. However, with the value of property in the big cities in California going up tremendously, the private companies are not understanding that $1 million home, like I said earlier, in Inglewood, should not be put on the same pedestal as a $1 million home in Texas. And again, this isn't completely statewide, because the Central Valley, Central Coast, different places throughout California, up near Sacramento, Stockton, they have different property value than Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, which, on average in Los Angeles specifically, a lot of homes have gotten closer to $1 million in Inglewood, and, places of the county that weren't even close to that 10 years ago. So the problem is, people keep running to the FAIR plan. Private insurance companies are not giving residents of big cities in California fair value. It's the same going for $3+ million homes in California versus Texas. May look like an enormous mansion in Texas, but only a modest sized house in a nice area in Los Angeles. Basically, what's happening is the California FAIR plan, the state government, and private insurance companies are not on the same level. And I know it's a stretch to say we should have regulations on private companies, because that's impossible. It's the private sector. You can have maybe some, but I don't know if that could ever be voted upon. But the big takeaway is they all need to sit in a room and get on the same page about property value in California, because it's completely different than any other state in the country. And Yeah, next
About
slide.
property value or about risk?
Both. So, I mean, risk for California, are you talking about specifically wildfires or risk of the property
Yeah.
value? Yeah, I mean,
Well-
risk, no. I mean, wildfires, yes, are rising, but I mean, we're not having hurricanes like Texas or Florida. Obviously, there's more destructive stuff happening in those states. The issue more is that everyone is moving. I mean, people are moving away, but a lot of the super rich people, like billionaires, multi-millionaires, moving to Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco County. And what's happening is the property value is at an extreme high, and it's completely different than anywhere in the state. Yet private insurance companies are operating California property value similar to other states' value, even though it's a completely different $1 million than, let's say, Texas based on property value. So next slide. Policy recommendations. Next slide. So adopt a polycentric governance model and engage local communities in emergency preparedness, education, and policy creation. 2, create statewide requirements to establish protocols in the event of a catastrophic fire. 3, invest more in CAL FIRE fuel management resources for employees, equipment, and projects. 4, create incentives for fuel reductions on private lands. And 5, like I was saying in my takeaways, private insurance companies, government FAIR plan must agree on California's property value to implement proper and affordable homeowner insurance for California residents to get more people off of the FAIR plan and to get people paired with affordable rates and private insurance. So that's our policy recommendations. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much for being here, Senator Liliana, Tina, Sam, and others, Kami as well. We appreciate you listening, and now we'll have a Q&A. Any questions you have, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Hey, very good. Excellent. Congratulations. Good job to the entire team. And as Brandon said, we certainly have time for additional questions with regard to any and all of our students. So, we're pretty informal here. If anyone would like to ask a question, you can jump in directed to either any one specific member of the team or to the team as a whole. And we'll use the rest of our time sort of teasing out this very important issue for the state of California. So Senator Allen, you have already asked a couple questions. I wonder if you wanted to sort of continue on any of those themes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the presentations. I mean, obviously a lot of thought and work went into these presentations, and I really do appreciate you're delving so deeply into this enormously difficult problem. And I think I also like the fact that each of you attack the issue from a very different but interesting angle. So I do have a number of questions. I mean, it's the first thing I'd love. So are you guys going to share the deck with us so we can have it?
Yeah, you'll
Okay.
not only get that, you'll also, each of the students will be producing a 8 to 10 page policy paper that includes all of their research. As I've told them, they can't put all of their 10, 12 weeks worth of research into a 10-minute presentation. So it not only has what they presented today, but also any additional information as well as resources that we will send along to your office.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So my first question, for Priya, I'm interested in getting a little, the theme I took out of your presentation was that in each of these countries, there was a real focus on community engagement and really somehow. So anyway, I like to get a little bit more color as to that, like what that looked like to you. What were some examples? Is the idea that there's a lot of danger in a sort of top-down expert-driven approach to wildfire management, and that you need to create more buy-in amongst the community so that they understand what's happening and they can actually play a more proactive role in helping? Is that the kind of core idea?
Yes, exactly. I think looking at those three countries, it's like a big disconnect between the government and the people, and like the ideas and they have and their knowledge on what they can do as individuals to protect themselves and their family. Like what Amara was saying with her personal experience of evacuation, I think that's something very similar that's happening, is people just don't know. There's people saying that, there's resources and there's information in these policies, but there's such a large disconnect and somewhat a lack of trust and connection between communities. And also what one of my points was, a lot of policies are very broad, but like even just in Los Angeles, like, demographics, everything can shift between like a couple streets. So having just like these grand policies that are very vast and large, instead of connecting really with the communities and what they need, whether that's through, they need Spanish translation, things like that, that maybe are kind of swept aside to create, kind of include a lot of people within policies, it ends up kind of working against them because they don't know these things. They're not being catered enough and supported enough. And I think, yeah, overall, just like a really great disconnect between government and people, and what those three countries are working on is trying to bridge that gap, whether that's through education, increasing trust, engaging in education, involving people in like volunteer firefighting, like and they're doing in Australia, things like that.
So out of all the examples you looked at, what was your favorite? Like, what do you think was most sticks with you as something we really? I understand you were bringing up different examples, but was there one particular program that really struck your fancy?
Yeah, I think Australia, just because the similarities between California and Australia, and I think they're of the three countries other than Canada, but like most similar. I think the idea of like stay and defend was really interesting, and how that connection of, defending your property and the connection to education, and how after protocols like that, like the families have a wealth of information, and how policies can kind of translate into the education that they have to employ in emergency situations was really fascinating to me. And how
they didn't like, did anyone die? I mean, the fear always is that when people stick around, I mean, you can educate people till the cows come home, but they're not firefighters. And anybody makes a mistake, or maybe they they misunderstood something that they were taught, and the next thing you know, this high intensity wildfire sweeping through, and people lose their lives.
Yeah.
Or they're distracted. I mean, or they end up diverting firefighter attention towards saving a homeowner's life as opposed to fighting the fire.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between stay and defend, if it were to happen here versus Australia, is a lot of those policies are enacted in rural communities, so they're waiting a long time for firefighters to come. So they have to do something instead of just like kind of sitting around and waiting, I guess. So that's where these policies come into play. But here at like in Los Angeles, you're not in a rural community. There's lots of buildings around you. So it's definitely a little different, but that could be something that could translate into a more rural community. And I don't know, like Central California or somewhere like that, where they may have to wait longer. But there is a certain amount of risk, but I think giving people the information, the knowledge, in case it comes down to, it's you versus your home, that's even more beneficial than nothing at all.
Were there deaths that happened in Australia as a result of stay and defend?
Not that I know of. I think they found a lot of success in it. But don't have the specific numbers about that, but I can imagine there's probably a couple, but it was definitely not, they found a lot of success in the policy, so it's not anything like crazy that's happened.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. I wanted to ask Amara. So you mentioned there were 4 different state programs, and they were all they're all kind of different things. I mean, so is your idea that we should implement all 4 of the models that you talked about? So the rainy day fund, and then like a coordinating group, and or is there a sense that there's some I guess have any of the states implemented a combination of the 4, or you were just highlighting those 4 as kind of best practices around the country in those different categories? If you understand
I wanted to highlight those important things coming from the 5 states that I chose, but I feel like when you mention a combination of doing all 5, I feel like for example, Oregon's task force on wildfire, essentially if California could implement the same type of thing, or the same type of council on wildfire response like Oregon, to a heightened level, we could possibly within that council, we can implement those 4 things. So like the council will mandate and make projections for a rainy day fund. And then the council will relegate responsibilities of what a clear, concise procedure for emergency wildfire response looks like that the public follows. And then another subcommittee within that council can mandate like the DARE program that I was talking about.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be like 5 separate bills that California implements, but maybe one, or we can choose one of those government mandates being like the Council on Wildfire Response, and that Council on Wildfire Response tackles each of the 4 things that I was mentioning before.
And the DARE idea, I mean, it's different. I mean, I guess the idea is just to really make kids, especially those in areas of high fire risk zones, just really aware of fire risks.
Yeah.
Response, how they, okay, all right. And then now we do, it's not as though we don't have coordinating structures in Sacramento and, the Office of Emergency Services and that sort of thing. What was it about, I mean, did you look at California's structure, and what was it about Oregon's that, that struck you as being better than what we have?
Although we've been dealing with wildfires longer than Oregon has, Oregon's council is much more thorough and in-depth as California, and they relegate, like I mentioned, like 5 different things that the council does in Oregon, but they handle the responsibility of like 20 different issues that occur with wildfires, whereas California, it's more broad and not as specific. And Oregon's council has several different subcommittees that handle certain issues. And that's what attracted me to that, as opposed to continuing with the model that California operates with, where it's very broad and there's only a focus on a couple different issues as opposed to numerous things that wildfires involve.
Okay, all right. All right, let me ask about, for you, Ryan. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, defensible space and prescribed burn. Of course, Amara talked about a successful defensible space program in North Carolina. Did you guys talk a little bit about? I'm sorry. So Ryan, you were focused more on prescribed burns, right? That was your.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. By the way, there's even some evidence, apparently, and it might be interesting to add into your future presentation, that Native American tribes engaged in prescribed burning in a very, obviously in a very modest degree, but that there was a recognition of natural fire processes, and that it was wise to do prescribed burns, even as there's evidence of this even before before the coming of the Spanish. So that that's always struck me as something that's very interesting. You're right about the lack of funding. I will say, did you get a chance to look at our latest fire package that we just, the $500 million we just put together about a month ago? Some of that's going to go toward the kinds of things that you're talking about. Obviously, there's still more to go for sure. And we've got some money in our resiliency bond, and but the state is slowly picking up the speed in terms of funding. But did you get a chance to look at our fire package?
Yeah, I looked at it. I thought that it was definitely in the right direction of what's going on. It's just that hopefully that Governor Newsom's, like his whole proposal of $1 billion in total for an upcoming year is going to be would be passed, because it provides a lot more funding than in previous years. So definitely, I would say that it's an improvement from what's been going on in the past couple of years, because even though the science has been advancing so much in promoting the necessity of prescribed burnings, especially in forests, but it's like a lot of the policy implementation hasn't been catching up until like this year, I would say. So I think there is a lot of progress that's happening, just kind of getting on top of that.
Yeah, I think there's just been, I think it's taken Californians in general. Just it's been, I don't know how many of you grew up in California, but it is a relatively recent thing that we've had this crazy, intense, year by year, smoke-filled fall. And yet it's become, now it really is becoming so regular. I think up until recently, people just thought, wow, this has got to be an anomaly. I mean, you know, there's obviously these terrible, I remember as a kid, there were some terrible fires from time to time in Malibu, but it was the kind of thing where it was once every, you know, few years, and it'd be a one-off, and it would be very kind of almost exciting. And yet now it's becoming such a regular occurrence, and it's starting to really impact basic air quality in our major cities as well. I mean, anyone who lived through the fall in Los Angeles, certainly anyone who lived through the last couple of years in the Bay Area, which you'd think would be pretty insulated given how far it is from the fire sources, and yet because of the wind patterns, the smoke was unbelievable. I mean, they said they had lights flickering on, nighttime lights flickering on during the day because things got so dark as a result of the smoke cover. So yeah, you're starting to see a lot more interest at the state to try to be more proactive. Did you get into, in fact, any of you guys, did you guys get into any of the really interesting environmental, there's some environmental challenges here. The environmental community, there's a battle over some of the firefighters just want to come in there and just, we need more equipment. We want all the best chemicals. And, I noticed that one of your presentations was talking about building materials. Maybe it was yours, Brandon. And of course, we're now having a huge controversy over treated wood, where a lot of times this wood is treated so as to lower its flammability, but then there's a lot of chemicals and toxins in the treatment process. And then once the home is torn down, or if there's excess wood, where does that go? I mean, we can't compost it. Even if you put it in the landfill, there's groundwater challenges. So there's that's a big issue. You got a lot of environmentalists who feel as though some of the firefighting techniques are too heavy-handed and aren't really in accord with nature. None of you guys, or at least, well, some of you alluded to, but because you talked about SB 55, one of the tough conversations is, should we be building further and further into the wildland urban interface, right? Should we, into very high fire risk zones? And SB 55 touches upon that. That bill's not going anywhere because there's so much pressure on the housing production side. And yet, I think there's an open question about whether it's wise for us to continue building into, deep into fire zones, not just because we have to protect those houses once they're out there, but also just even the act of having people live out there dramatically increases the risk of there being a fire. Sparks from driving and traffic, even the transmission lines. Like, we're asking our utilities to pay more and more to build these transmission lines deeper and deeper into the mountains. And then when something happens, when a spark flies off of the transmission line during a drought or during a high, a very dry time, then all of a sudden we have a big fire. And that wouldn't have happened as frequently if we hadn't been building, into those zones. So that's a whole nother question that we've got to spend some time thinking about. And, and it's, by the way, I mean, for Brandon, your points, I mean, you're absolutely, so you're right. You're absolutely right about the fact that there's a problem with the caps because of the heightened property values. And of course, because of the heightened property values, the liability is so much higher, right? So we've got high risk and then high liability. It costs more to insure a $3 million home that might burn to the ground than a $300,000 home that might get destroyed by a hurricane in Texas. But it's absolutely true that we are having, more and more people, more and more insurance companies looking at our wildfire season and just saying, this is crazy. This is getting way out of control. We don't really know where this is going. This is not what we signed up for. We're pulling out. And a lot of people, I represent a lot of the Santa Monica Mountains, and a lot of the folks living up there in the mountains that are very high fire risk zones are now having to turn to like Lloyd's of London. I mean, there's only a few insurance companies that are willing to step up and insure them. And that's becoming a whole nother issue too. The other kind of broader public policy challenge is, okay, we can try to mandate that the insurance companies provide coverage to these folks. But I will say there's an unfairness there, because in forcing that, we're effectively raising premiums for other people who don't live in high fire risk zones so as to subsidize the presence of the insurance companies in those high fire risk zones. And is that really fair, right? Is it fair for someone living in South LA or Inglewood or Santa Monica who really is not at a high fire, wildfire risk to be paying more so that some folks can live in these beautiful homes up in the mountains or in Malibu? That's of course the equity reality in Los Angeles. What Paradise brought up that I thought was so poignant and touching is that there's actually also a lot of rural high fire risk poverty. So it's very different than the LA dynamic, right? So if you live in a high fire risk zone in LA, you're typically a wealthier person. But there's all these towns up in Northern California where people have fled from the Bay Area. They can't afford to live there anymore. And so they're moving further and further out into the mountains. Paradise was a very, very poor town. So there's some interesting equity issues there too. Anyway, this is super tough stuff. And I think you guys have touched on a lot of really big issues. I'd love to see your deck. And I'm going to forward it on to some people, and maybe we'll get. And when are you guys getting your papers done? When are those going to be complete?
Their papers will be done by Monday.
Oh, by Monday. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And
the
then
semester wraps up. So.
And then let me ask you guys a question. Would you be willing, after Professor Auerbach redlines your papers, you know what typically happens, right? You just look at the, sometimes it's over, right? You barely even look at the red lines. I hate to say it. Would you be willing to make edits based on your professor's feedback and then send the papers to us so that we have both the benefit of your research, but also your professor's good oversight? I think that we would certainly appreciate that. And also would ensure that your professor's work is not for naught.
I assume my students read absolutely everything in terms of critiquing. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
Yeah, probably look at the grade and that's about it. But we would be absolutely happy to share everything with you: papers, the slide deck, and this recording. I might add, if you could have any use for it. It's such a wonderful experience, and we've had such good luck with working with politicians like yourself who are willing to give their time to college students. It truly makes all the difference in the world. And when this topic first came up, I just knew how important it is. I assume, like yourself, I grew up in the Bay Area for a bit, but Los Angeles for most of my life. And I know exactly what you're talking about, where sure, we'd have a fire here and there, but it's not like a fire season where in November, we're having tens of thousands of acres burning. And it's so interconnected in so many different ways. And I don't envy your task in trying to resolve it, but I appreciate, all Californians appreciate the effort, because this problem's not going away, plain and simple.
Oh man, it sure isn't. And I feel terrible about it, because it's like, this is just, now I have a little kid now, and this last fire season, I was thinking to myself, what is this our reality now? Am I going to have to worry about basic questions of air quality beyond? I mean, I guess I got used to smog. That was something I kind of learned to live with, I suppose. And I was, and to be fair, I was living on the coast, so the smog's not as bad as even where you guys are at USC. But is this really going to be? Is this the reality for kids growing up in California now, in the Bay Area or LA, Sacramento, that we're going to be just subjected to grotesquely unhealthy air quality every single year for such a big portion of the year? And right when kids are in school and playing sports, and it's life changing is the truth. And I will tell you,
we know Sacramento's up to the task. So.
Well, I don't know. I hope so. I certainly hope so.
Too.
I mean, I will say I think it's finally starting to gain some traction. The resources are starting to come together. But we're going to have to get smart about this. It's going to be it's a lot. There's going to be a lot of work in this space. So, if this is something that struck any of your fancies, this is a long-term public policy problem that's not going away in our state, and there's going to be job opportunities, to be honest, for folks like you moving forward, if this is an area that really has interested you. And let me just say to you, Professor, I absolutely, love to continue this partnership with you in the
Great.
future. It's helpful for us get our heads around these issues, and obviously we love to see all the young talent coming up, and the bright minds that you're helping to educate. So
I was just going to say, I'm a big fan of working with local elected officials. I just think it's, we work with NGOs and we work with a variety of different organizations, but one of my priorities is really to work with you all, because to me, it's a perfect marriage of, you have the need in terms of you have a limited staff, all of which is incredibly brilliant and hardworking, but you could, just overwhelmed. That's just the reality, right? And we've got the interest and people who can do the legwork, and so we are happy to continue on. This program's been running about 10 years, and we've had a lot of great success. And so we will look forward to a future relationship, definitely, on a variety of issues. We always leave it to our provider to come up with what they need.
You would be shocked by how many decisions we're having to make, and I don't want to say on the fly, but but really without the full rigor that the challenges would call for. And yet, I'm also always shocked, having spent some time in the academy myself, how little we end up really talking to each other, in spite of the expertise that exists on your side, and then like the power and responsibility and need that exists on our side. So anyway, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to jump. I have to jump on another meeting, but why don't I leave Sam and Lily and Tina on the call, and you guys can keep talking shop. Tina actually has been, involved with staffing me on, I actually serve on this wildfire committee, and I'm also on the natural resources and water committee that oversees fire issues. And I'm the chair of the environmental quality committee, which oversees air quality issues, which of course are directly related to the fire liabilities. And Tina's been working with me very closely on those issues, and obviously Lily and Sam in LA. So let me jump on this other meeting I'm already late to, but give you guys a chance to do some more deep diving with them. But I appreciate your hard work, and looking forward to reading your papers and sending them on to some people too.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate, we know how valuable your time is, and it's been a very good experience. We look forward to working with you again in the future.
Good. Yeah. And I got a good team, and I hope, I don't know, maybe you guys will, you've gotten a sense. We've got really good, strong public servants working for elected officials like myself, and really making the whole system work. And so it's definitely something to think about, for the future in terms of potential jobs.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Before I go, Sam, can you send me the link for the meeting with Nicole? Because it's not in the calendar. Do you know? You're muted. You're muted. Oh, she's here. Oh my God. Okay. All right.
She's in the office. I think she's
here. Okay. All right. I don't even know. Because of COVID, I don't even know who's here half the time. It used to be we were always here, and then now it's like staggered. So anyway, all right, guys. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Senator. That was great. So I know we're running a little long on time, but I certainly want to give Tina and Sam and Lily or whomever the opportunity to ask a few questions if you have. If not, we've always, the senator was so generous with his time. But let me turn it over to any of you if you have any last questions, and then we'll go from there.
This is great. It was a fantastic presentation. I want to say nice work to everybody. The one thing I'd be super interested in seeing, if there is any detail around it, is whether or not there's like a specific list of what is in the protocol that local residents are trained to either spend or to be better prepared.
Tina,
and I know my internet connection's lousy, so I apologize.
No, that's okay. We did lose your question, though. I'm sorry. Can you repeat? Would you mind repeating?
Yeah, it's been a struggle this morning.
I bet. I get it. I understand.
If there are any specifics when it comes to the protocols that are used to help train locals and ensure that they are better prepared to either be volunteer firefighters or to stay and defend, et cetera, or as it relates to that governmental, local coordination. So if there are any specifics that you've seen in the other, like in Australia or in Oregon, that would be helpful.
Great. Priya and Amara.
And you don't have to answer the question now. If you've got something like, here's what they had in another country, you can send it my way. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I think overall it's been, from what I can see from my research, it's been like a very like strict training in a way, like beyond just like a pamphlet and stuff. It's like they're genuinely being trained on how to defend their property, like I think physically as well, which beyond just like a online, question or something, like beyond just something very surface level. I think that's overall what they're kind of leaning towards in terms of training. For volunteer firefighters, I'm not sure about the training with that. I'd be happy to do more research and send that your way though.
Great. Amara, did you happen to see anything in Oregon?
Not specifically on like the stay and defend training or anything of that sort, but I mean the volunteer firefighter thing comes up everywhere where there's firefighting happening. But the only research I've seen in terms of that is just paying volunteer firefighters, or the side where inmates are made to be volunteer firefighters.
Yeah, I was going to say volunteer.
Volunteer.
Yeah.
Nothing else in that
Great.
for me.
Wonderful.
I have a question, kind of for Ryan, and maybe Tina, you can help shed some light on this. I was just so struck by the map that you shared that demonstrated kind of where in the country prescribed burning is used the most. And to see that the Southeast was dark red, I thought was super fascinating. And I'm just wondering, are there kind of political undertones to prescribed burning? I noticed that most of those states are very conservative, very red. So I'm wondering if there's a little bit more going on to who okays it and who doesn't.
Good question.
Yeah, so the Southeast kind of has a longer history of doing prescribed burnings in cooperation with both like interstate and with the government. I think there is like a organization in the Southeast. Let me find it. It's the Southeast Regional Partnership for Planning and Sustainability, like it's called SERPAS. And it basically has it's like a bunch of state officials from the Southeast region cooperating together along with the DoD in initiating a lot of prescribed burning, as well as a lot of things for both military purposes, as well as clearing for safety to like preserve military bases and local areas as well that they've been doing historically for years. Also in that region, there's a lot of more acceptance of the prescribed burning as a concept and the risks that are associated with it. I think there were some studies that pointed to the fact that there's just a more higher tolerance for like the air quality as a result of prescribed burnings, particularly in those regions because of the history of doing it. So I think it's partly just that in those regions, they've been doing it for so long, and it's also like, what is it called? It's also encouraged and actively done in both publicly and privately.
Interesting.
I think that's going to be a hurdle in California because this is just such a fairly recent phenomena. I mean, at least the large scale burnings. But I will tell you, I'm asthmatic, and there was a point where my wife and I left Los Angeles because I just couldn't breathe. And I was like, honey, I need oxygen to breathe, and this isn't working. And that's the first time it's ever happened to me where I physically had to leave a location because of the situation. So if someone said, well, prescribed burning is going to hurt the environment, which I get, there's a living element, I think, that comes in play, cost of living elements. So great question. Politicizing prescribed burnings is a tragedy, but it doesn't strike me as odd.
Yeah, especially in this country.
Yeah, I know, where everything seems to get politicized. All right, I don't want to hold you all too long. Do we have any last questions? Sam, I didn't want to exclude you. If you had anything, if you didn't, that's certainly fine too.
No, this is great. I think this has been super comprehensive. I don't know how in the past you've kind of stayed in touch with your local elected partner offices, but I think this is not an issue that's going to go away. And so to the extent that you guys are interested in still working on these areas and seeing how the policy kind of unfolds. You
Great.
guys have our contact info, so please, I think, you know, I think you've really kind of got sent around thinking this morning.
That's great. Well, that's part of, you know, our goal is to obviously provide you all with information, but also to continue and inspire. And you know, we always have a need, not just for partners, but good partners. And we certainly put you in the classification of partners who gave your time when we know how busy you are. And I mean that sincerely. So we just want to thank you. I always say this program only runs because we have partners that are willing to work with us. And so we really do appreciate everything you've done. We will certainly reach out to you again. And it is not uncommon where we'll reach out to a former partner and they're like, we don't have anything, we're too busy. We get that. SC is not going anywhere. This program's not going anywhere. We'll cycle back through. And you're also welcome to reach out to us. And if you have a topic that you're like, wow, I could really use some in-depth research, you could certainly reach out to Nicole and we can work with you on that. Lily.
I just wanted to share really quickly as well. I don't know if anyone's graduating already, but I do help to oversee our internship program for the office. And if any of you are ever interested in joining our team for a season, we would love to bring you on. So just something to keep in the back of your mind moving forward.
Great. Well, we love placing interns. I'm not going to lie. I've got about 50 of them right now, including these all. So we will certainly take advantage of that opportunity. And if it works for you all, wonderful. And it always works out for us when we can place our students in internships. So I think we're good. I think we're ready to call it a day. I want to congratulate the team. I think you all did a wonderful job. Again, Sam, Lily, Tina, to the Senator, thank you all. And we'll look forward to working with you next time.